Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hey, everybody. I am in Philly today. I'm going to speak at the MPI Philadelphia chapter tomorrow about food allergens and food for thought. But I am in the Aramark in general, right? Global headquarters of Aramark with my friend Aric Ferrell, who is, I had your title over there. Where did it go? He is the Vice President of Operations for Aramark's Destinations Group, overseeing a portfolio of conference centers, cultural attractions, national parks, and which is encompassing lodging and food and beverage and facility operations. So we know each other through IAC.
Yes.
Yep. So hi.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here today. This is very cool.
It's very cool. And last night I went on a walk to figure out where I was going, and because I'm staying walkable, and I'm like, oh, there's this humongous Aramark sign and building, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. It's a beautiful building.
It's the one and only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the headquarters, but it's also the innovation center for the company. So tell us what that means.
So we had the Innovation Center in a very historic building in Philadelphia, and we had our global headquarters right down the street on Market Street. 2018, we decided that it was time for us to move, and being so integrated with the local community here, there was an emphasis on staying in Philly. So we moved up Market Street, and the idea was to integrate our center-led divisions into one building, and that's still ongoing. We have a few groups that have fallen into this structure here, is all of our marketing. And the Innovation Center is really the core of what we do from a culinary effort across the enterprise, globally. So, and I know you've had some interface with some of our innovation chefs, but it's really a test facility, a laboratory of sorts that we can really pressure test and break recipes and development for the field. So bringing that in and having that interface with the cross-functional groups across the entirety of the center has been advantageous for us as an organization. So having everybody in the same building is really nice.
Well, yeah. And for everybody to understand that, so he oversees conference centers and parks and what was the other one? Cultural attractions. Yep. But they also do stadiums and arenas. And so there's a lot of verticals where they serve food and beverage and they manage venues. So, and a lot of times when you're in those venues, I'm like, oh, hey, do you know anybody? And they're like, that's a completely different vertical. Nobody knows anybody. And so it's, and it's not just Aramark that does that. There's a variety of companies that do that, but the verticals are a lot of times they're very separate.
Yeah. The best story I tell is one day you'd walk and you'd look into the innovation kitchen, and just to kind of paint a picture, there's a very large window where us common folk can go spectate.
We were doing that earlier, yes.
But one day they'll be testing 9 different macaroni and cheeses, and the next day you walk in, they're sweating lobster shells, and they're doing really refined culinary work, which there is a very large, not disparity, but separation what we do as an organization across each of our lines of business, and rightfully so. When you go to an aquarium or a zoo, your culinary profile is going to be completely different than when you're sitting in a boardroom in a conference center. So,
okay. We literally watched that, and there were some healthcare chefs in there. So you manage also hospitals, food and beverage, and we ran into Chef Tim, who oversees the innovation.
He does. He is the senior director for our innovation group. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Now, before we dive into what he said, so tell us about when you oversee parks and cultural attractions and conference centers, what does that encompass? Because and through IAC, you're kind of the management, or it depends on what venue you're at, right?
Yep. So Destinations, it was formerly known as Leisure, is our line of business that I currently sit in. That essentially covers anything that touches the lodging piece. We have about 9,000 rooms across the country, sizable lodging space. But with all those spaces, there's a few outliers that don't have a food and beverage element. And when I say a few, very few.
Okay.
So there is a ton of integration there. Our group does specialize in the lodging sector of Aramark, but also extremely proficient when it comes to the food and beverage piece. And that's when we talk about cultural attractions, we're talking about zoos, we're talking about aquariums. We have outliers from some of our national parks. We have other outdoor spaces, Bushkill Falls, which is a beautiful outdoor space that has hiking and natural waterfalls. It's located in Pennsylvania. So we have a few that don't fall into that National Park Service portfolio that outline.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this, I don't know where I want to go with this. There's so much involved in managing a hotel or managing a conference center and even that park or that zoo. Let's just use that as an example. But like you said, the food at the zoo is going to be different than the food at a conference center. So how do you innovate? You have to be innovative in both. So how does this center really work to help figure out what should you be serving? Because you still want comfort food at a conference center.
Absolutely. We lean heavily on our field culinary talent. And I think Tim touched upon that when we spoke. The idea is to inspire our chefs to think what's going to work well for their particular group, whether it's a conference center or an aquarium or a national park. What is going to be hyper local? We have one of the parks that I oversee is in the middle of Lake Superior, sourcing local trout. What's going to work for that particular, and how innovation gets involved is that our field talent, our executive chefs or sous chefs or even line level chefs in some cases will develop a recipe. They'll send it in to our innovation center. They will, in better terms, try to break it in a way that makes sense and that it's repeatable across, all of our categories. So that trout recipe that comes in from that national park could be replicated at another national park or even in a conference center. And that gets centralized into a catalog that we have it's basically a really big grandmother's recipe book that we have.
Okay.
The really great part about what we do from a center perspective is that we are working with supply chain so that we're able to vet the actual ingredients that are going in there so that we can be diligent when it comes to what is actually in the food.
Okay.
And in worst cases, allergens, or another instance is if there's a recall, we typically find out about 48 hours in advance of the public. So we're able to pull those ingredients right off the shelf and react very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's important because he says avoid romaine lettuce, right? So you're getting that notice well before we are from MSN or whoever it is. Yeah. And because you're utilizing those ingredients in dishes that we don't necessarily know of. And that's really, the fact that you have that direct line is important.
Yep.
So when we were walking and we talked to Tim and I said, so what is the newest innovation? And I thought it was interesting that he said, going back to the basics and really looking at, and he said it multiple times, transparency. Mm-hmm. And the other two terms that he said was, it was intention and purpose. Is that right? Is that what he said? I think
that's what he said.
Yeah. And really looking at how they're designing recipes and what they're serving with intention and purpose. And so can you talk on that some more on his behalf?
Yeah. Well, Tim covered off really well on the culinary piece. And he also touched upon us circling back on some really classic recipes, right? Mm-hmm. And reinventing the way that we either display or we package them either with, I think he used the example of a wrap, which is perfect. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks are on the go now. So incorporating a lot of those old school salads that we had into a wrap or not trying to reinvent the wheel. And then from a front of house perspective, I can talk very close to my heart is the human piece that we've kind of started to get really far away from pre-COVID. Right. And now we're kind of reeling that back in as that human interface and that direct line of communication that we're having with the guest as they're asking information on their meals and making sure that our staff and our employees that are touching the front lines are informed And if they don't have the right answers, that they feel comfortable going to find them quickly when it comes to our guests making food decisions.
Well, even when we went through lunch today, you ordered the standard salad up there, which was salmon quinoa, if I remember correctly. And you're like, but I only want arugula. And it was a good conversation with her. And she wanted to make sure that she understood what you were asking for.
Yeah, she asked me like 3 or 4 clarifying questions.
She did. Yeah. She's like, only the arugula and the cabbage. And then I'm like, I want it the regular. And I told her, I'm like, I don't ever ask for the regular. I'm the one asking for everything changed. And it was clearly labeled and with allergens up there on the top. So I was really happy about that. And it was a delicious salad. And but it does add that touch. And you thanked her for that. And,
I did, yeah.
And to me, that means a lot. Last week, I was at a conference and I was supposed to have no nuts in my conference at all because we had somebody anaphylactic. And this is just touching on the front of the house. And that gets listed on the BEOs and things. And the very first breakfast we were serving, we had 4 different pastries on there and 2 of them came out with nuts on them. And my server, who was with me for 3 days prior getting prepped, he's like, Tracy, these have nuts and we're removing them from the buffet. And I took his pictures. He's like, am I in trouble? I'm like, no, I'm going to commend you because you read your BEO, you talked to me, you understood it. And it really showed the rest of them as well. To me, I think we take our front of house staff for granted a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
They see a lot.
I think the one thing that we reinforce across our line of business and probably at enterprise level is we have a lot of repeat guests, but we never rely on repeat information. Like we want to have an informed decision. So it's always not relying on what was valid yesterday and validating it in the moment, because obviously restrictions can change over time. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with our guests, asking the qualifying questions, much like that young lady did at lunch. She did a really thorough job of explaining what the difference between the 2 food items were, which I thought was really important. So it's that dialogue, that 2-way dialogue that we're getting.
Right. Yeah. And it to me, it empowers them as well because it gives them a sense of an additional sense of pride in their job. And if wherever you are, if you're talking to front of house staff, a lot of them have worked places and even Chef Tim, 30-something years. 36 years. Yeah. So they have this sense of pride. They want to do the right thing and they want to work for this company. And to me, it adds that extra value to say, your job is important in communicating that. Okay. So the other thing in this innovation center when we were walking around is some really cool, and I need you to take a video of me doing my phone again, but the trash, the sustainability aspect of it. So you work in national parks, which we don't want to get trashed. How are you all managing sustainability and food waste or waste in general at the national parks, but also when you're in the kitchens and front of house?
Yeah. Outside of safety, it's probably our second most critical touch point as an organization, and really comes down to obviously refuse, but also the food waste products. So we're constantly using technology to help us. And you actually experience that from a front of the house perspective, but what we're doing from a back of the house perspective is we have a proprietary software that actually tracks our production. We actually utilize that down to the line level. So some of our hourly associates are inputting data points that it's using over time to help us model production and actually reduce our food waste. We monitor what comes in, but we also weigh our waste on the way out. Okay. So that we want to make sure that we're getting that to a point of reduction that we are comfortable with and not wasting food. Now, when it comes down to what we're doing from a national park perspective in particular, we're seeing a big departure from plastics in general. I think we're seeing that across the board, which I fully personally applaud that effort. Aluminum cans in general are coming in different shapes and sizes now. Refillable, reusable, indefinitely recyclable. Whereas glass and plastic are, unfortunately, in most cases, become trash. So we're seeing our partners, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis of the world, really going in hard on endeavoring aluminum as the vessel that we move forward with as into the future, which I'm excited about. We've also seen that happen quite prolifically in the beer world as well. I mean, everything is canned at this point, and and when it comes to alcoholic beverages, in particular beer, it's a better vessel from a light perspective, from an air containment perspective. It's just a better product that coming out of the can.
And I'm going to reach over here and get my lunch plate because I want to show you something and ask a question about this.
Sure.
So there's a sticker on the outside of this plate. I'm going to pick it up and show it to you. It says, don't throw away. Please only return to redish bin. So is this something you only do here? Or is this something that you do in your conference centers, et cetera?
We do this. It is an effort it's completely up to our clients. There is an expense that obviously comes with that. I will tell you that it is not a one-for-one for placement from a direct expense perspective when it comes to disposables. There is a little bit of an additional expense there, but obviously very well intentioned and well serving for the environment. Mm-hmm. Also, we use metal silverware.
Right.
That all gets, and after we finish our lunch, we'll go throw this into a vessel and it gets picked up and they clean and sanitize that off-site. And from a labor piece, it does make sense. You can reduce your labor model on-site because we're not actually cleansing them on-site. And in facilities that don't typically have a dishwasher, we have a ware washer on premises that will wash a lot of our heavy pots and pans. Would not be appropriate for a rewashable ware like that we would use. So
these get reused.
They do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This gets reused. Yeah. Wow.
And we're also seeing the city governments getting involved. The local Ann Arbor, Michigan, we have an account up there. They have a citywide, very similar program. I went to a very famous deli, Zingerman's, and got a couple pieces of really nice prosciutto slice, and they put it in a plastic container. When you were done with it, you would and it was a citywide program. So
wow.
All restaurants are doing that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, very cool.
Because, but you have other cities that are fighting for doing this, and it's financial and all of that. But okay. And when you're talking sustainability, silverware is better and reusable dishes is better. So this is probably better than using China because the China is going to break versus 100%. This.
Yes.
And so you're probably buying less of this than China plates across the board.
Yep.
You need to figure out how to get that sticker off before. So it can be reused. And actually there was I don't know what convention center I was in, but there was a whole, going back to the aluminum, it was like, buy this aluminum can of water, use it and trade it in. And they actually had the cleaning mechanism in the back of the house that cleaned that aluminum can. And it was not to the level of a Yeti or one of those, but then they redid the water in it. And so they were keeping those water bottles. I mean, it cost me a little bit more, but although on the other hand, I could just bring my own reusable water bottle and refill it all the time.
Not to get too nuanced on this particular program, but you'll notice that your vessel does not close all the way.
It does not.
And neither does mine.
Right.
That is quite intentional.
Why?
The idea is that we don't want them to leave the premises. It'll close, it'll seal with your hand.
Right.
But it'll intentionally open when you let go so that you don't put that in your bag to take home with you. We want to make sure that we're retaining, close to 100% of those vessels because there is an expense if they go missing.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And the company's called Redish, just so you know. And I do the aluminum water bottles and things like that. I do like that as well. Let's talk food waste on the front of the house.
Sure.
How are you all managing? I mean, and actually somebody said to me the other day, well, food waste is the responsibility of the kitchen. It's not responsibility of the food front of the house. And kind of going back to that, the servers, they see a lot of things that the back of the house does not see. How are you, and if you are doing it, I don't know the answer to this, educating the front of the house that food waste is part of their responsibility?
Yeah, so I guess the best example that I would pull on for this conversation is our conference centers. A lot of our conference centers work in a very buffet model. So, and our conference centers, for the most part, are either higher ed or some government facilities that they don't want their folks to go through and be without food. So there is this optics of robust offering at all times. It's managing and balancing the optics of walking through it and making it look plentiful, even down to the last customer, because it's just as important as the first. But what we're seeing in the conference center space, and even in some of these very prestigious universities is that there is food insecurity within the student population.
Yes.
So we are partnering with our clients to make sure that we are repurposing food where we can. In some situations, that food gets offered to our employee population as by way of employee meals.
Right.
And there's definitely a few different angles. And then locally in the Philadelphia market in particular, we've partnered with the Ronald McDonald House in ways that we can help them with food. So a couple of multi-streamed answer to the question, but we really rely on our different operators to determine what works best with their model and what works best for their local community.
Right. And it does come back to that. I mean, how much space do you have? Do you have the kitchen space to restore or put the food back in the refrigerator to then donate, et cetera? So it does take a lot. My friend Margaret just said, bravo to Zingerman's and Ann Arbor.
Agreed.
She is
amazing.
She is the Michigan gluten-free gal. So if you know anything gluten-free in Michigan, you can talk to Margaret. She's awesome. But in that, I think I chatted with our friend at IAC, Simon from London, and because in the UK, they actually have to label for all the nutrients if they're going to donate the food as well. But they did a community fridge for their staff because they're like, well, if we're going to donate it outside of the hotel to the community, we might as well donate it internally to our employees first.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. And what about composting? Is there a big push for composting? Is it easy to do? Is it not easy to do?
It's definitely not easy to do.
No.
It's not easy to do because it really takes a lot of discipline from a front of the house and then an end user perspective. So it's done. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And we have a local partner. We use a local group here in Philadelphia that comes and picks up. But we talked about cross-contamination. Right. And when it comes to that effort, if there's a plastic fork in there, they will throw that away. They just don't have the time or the energy to sort through that. So it's really about educating our folks from when it comes time to get to the receptacle. And I think you're going to touch upon that in a little bit, as we have deployed technologies that will help you segregate your trash so that we're able to properly stream that to the appropriate, whether it's recycling, organics, or just straight trash. We want to make sure they go to the right place.
Right. Yeah. And I'll show the video of it, but I put my phone up because I didn't have any food in front of me, but I put my phone up and the video came up and said, that goes in your pocket, which I thought was so cool. I'll do a video of that later. Because it is the job of filtering that stuff is hard.
It is.
And getting it to the right place. And it reminds me, I went to Slow Food Terra Madre del Solando Gusto in Italy, and they had 8 different bins.
Yes.
And they had somebody there to tell you, okay, put the paper napkin in this one, put this in this one. And it does require really filtering it all out.
Yeah. And it's a lot easier.
Right.
It's like not returning the shopping cart, right? You have an option. You can either put it in the cart bin or you can just leave it right next to your vehicle. So,
and the people who put it in the cart bin and then don't push it in are the people that annoy me the most. Some guy did that the other day. 2 people were putting their cart in at the same time, and he put it right next to his. Why would you not stack it? Oh my gosh, drives my mom.
We could probably spend the next 40 minutes talking about the shopping carts.
We could. Oh, it drives me nuts. But okay, so let's talk allergens. Let's see, I had a quote from you that said, you seem to be the victim of cross-contamination with some frequency lately, and foreign objects and unidentified ingredients. So not just food allergens, but tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I think one of my earliest memories as a student in high school was when we got pizza and I just pulled something out of it and it was a hair. And ever since then, it's just, that's been burnt into my memory. And I always seem to be the recipient of either a piece of plastic, or I've shared it in some cases. I just recently got a piece of metal in my food, which was terrifying. And listen, some of these happen at the local level, but I think in the case of, I was able to track down, it was ice cream in particular, it was a piece of plastic, and it came from the plant. It had to, just because of the shape and the texture of the plastic. It didn't come from the bin that it was in. So listen, there's some controllables, but the one thing that I will tell you that we do as an organization and previous to this organization has always been paramount personally, because of obvious reasons, is food safety. So as you're walking through our spaces, while it's not attractive, we have everybody in hairnets, cut gloves, making sure that everyone is in proper gloves and making sure that they're preparing their food safely and that we are reducing any of those opportunities for cross-contamination.
Did you see the video of the lady who opened up a bag of green beans and there was a snake head in it? It was a frozen bag of green beans at home.
I would not be okay.
Oh, I mean, and the green beans were cut fresh then, but no snake. Right? Exactly. Yeah. Not a good thing. Where's the quality control on that? Right. Yeah. Okay. So hair aside and blades aside and snake heads aside, but how do you, and we had this conversation with Chef, because I said, how do you label gluten-free? Right. Because and Margaret, this is really keen for you here, because when we buy something gluten-free, he's like, it should be just in a bag, but I don't like, how do you label that? And Chef said he's doing it gluten-friendly because there is flour in the air because it is a kitchen. But how do you teach the front of the house and the back of the house about that cross-contamination, cross-contact to avoid and help people who do have food allergies?
Yeah. So I can't speak personally on this, but I know just from touring different facilities that we do have allergen kitchens in particular, treated very similar to a kosher kitchen where there are not those opportunities for flour to be in the air. We would see these in particular instances in our collegiate hospitality group. Right. Whereas we have a very captive audience. They are paying very large amounts of money to go to a school, and the parent's expectation is that their student comes back in one piece, and we want to make sure that is our endeavor as well. So we have very specialized kitchens that will concentrate and make sure that I'm being a little bit over the top, but hermetically sealed in some cases, whereas there won't be any other opportunities. In a general population kitchen like this, where we're testing and vetting different recipes, there is going to be an element of gluten. We do our best to keep those areas separate from general prep areas so that we can convey that it is a gluten-friendly environment. Okay. Yeah. If you were to come in and tell me you're celiac or you would have a very adverse reaction to any kind of, I would advise that you probably not partake in our food in this particular environment.
Yeah, but I still have I don't know. Yeah. And Margaret, pipe in here, but I'm like, I said this at the Food Allergy Awareness Summit earlier this year. I was talking to a group of college and high school cafeteria, or not cafeteria, but food service companies. I said, I love the fact that you have those separate kitchens, but you're also teaching these teenagers, these young adults, that's the way the world is. And I told them from the podium, I said, I love this, but you need to be able to let them eat elsewhere, because when they go out into the world of work and whatever, they're not in an environment where there's a separate kitchen for them to eat food from. And when it's given to them as a benefit of employment or whatever, it's got to be a mixture of, hey, let's educate them on how to eat this way, but also let's educate our teams on how to feed them. And there's so many people that make fun of different dietary restrictions, and we were just talking about just before we started that neither one of us drink alcohol, right? But some people will say, well, you don't drink? Why is that an issue? Right? I think put that out to the world.
Yeah. No, it's good. April, so not that long.
I'm 5 years. Yeah.
It really comes down to the communication, and Tim touched upon it. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, right? We want to just be as transparent as possible. And if we feel like we're going to put somebody in a dangerous or unsafe position, we just want to make sure that we're conveying our seriousness of the issue, because we cannot. It is very difficult to guarantee anything outside of, taxes and death, right? So we want to make sure that we're just being as transparent, and there's going to be a level of risk there that is calculated, and we will do everything we can to accommodate a guest. But yes, you're right. Not everybody in the outside world is going to be as dedicated and diligent as we are here in this facility or at our other facilities.
Well, and going back to that nut story too, right? I'm like, the hotel said, well, we're not a nut-free environment. And I said, understand that. And so when I called the woman to talk to her about it, I said, we're not going to serve nuts at our event, any kind of nuts, but I need you to know that it's not a nut-free environment. And she's like, I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we, as the consumer, understands that, and we trust that you're going to do your due diligence and as much as you can to protect us, we're fine. And Margaret just piped in here. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate the care that they were willing to take, but I think they also need to be aware that the term gluten-friendly can actually cause more anxiety because we think it means don't prevent cross-contact. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so and that is in the context too of like, hey, I'm partnering with you at this convention center. What does that mean? Putting that definition out to Margaret so Margaret knows it, or have Margaret talk to you directly, right? Say, hey, I'm coming to this. I have celiac disease. How can you serve me?
Yeah. I should say, and I'm not certainly.
Well, and I'm not putting you on the spot, no. But it's just in general. I mean, this is society.
I'm not rewinding here, Margaret, and this is directed at you, but we wouldn't use that term gluten-friendly externally. We use it internally to kind of convey. We want to make sure that when a guest walks up and they tell us that they have gluten insensitivity or even worse, an allergy, that we're having that ongoing dialogue to let them know. I doubt very well that any of the folks that we engage with, we use that term. So I think maybe you saw a little bit behind.
Right. Yeah. And sorry. Yeah. And again, it's not Aramark. I'm not singling Aramark out. I'm not. What I saw up there was very clearly labeled. Mm-hmm. When I'm going up to the cafeteria thing, it says contains wheat, contains nuts, contains whatever, contains fish. And the person was able to have a conversation with them, and she knew what she was doing, right? And the guy even making the salad dressing or putting the salad dressing on my salad, he's like, nope, there's no allergens in here. And so, and again, I'm not, only because we're sitting here at Aramark, so I'm not bad mouthing or.
Well, you saw the belly of the beast,
right? Yeah, I did, yeah.
You got to see underneath the hood.
I did, but it's a challenge, I think, in society in general, in all of food service, of how do we not, as my term for thrive is, kill or offend people with the food that we serve them. And it's hard. It's not an easy fix. And even tomorrow, and I don't know if I asked you this, but like tomorrow I'm speaking at MPI, and one of the laws that came out in the state of Pennsylvania said they were adopting the food code as is, and 2022 food code. And it says the labeling of unpackaged food. You have to label unpackaged food and bulk food with food allergens, top 9 food allergens. And I reached out and I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, we're just going to do that. And I'm like, it's not as easy as just saying that. Well, okay, let's bring this question up, or this story that Tim told us. He got Chef Tim here, got a call from the American cheese manufacturer that said, hey, you can't call this cheese vegan or vegetarian because it actually has animal milk rennet in it, right? And he's like, and that kind of threw him for kind of a loop in some respects, but it comes down to that transparency.
Yeah. And it was just 2 categories out of multiple lines of cheese that they had from this particular company.
Right. Yeah. So who knows, right? And I think that's when I told him about the alpha-gal, right? Yeah. Alpha-gal syndrome with the mammal allergy. But so I think it's just changing our whole perspective on food and beverage in general.
The advantage we have of being the company that we are is that our suppliers have that direct line of communication with us. Yeah. We are able to provide that to the end user. And more importantly, the folks that have sensitivities or those restrictions within their diet. So it comes down to being informed, not only communicating with our guests, but communicating with our suppliers.
Well, and I think that was reiterated with our conversation with Tim, because he said since COVID, it's really helped put a perspective on that transparency, and that, well, and maybe it's something that you all are saying, hey, we need this transparency from you, and maybe we won't work with you if you don't have it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kudos to you for putting it, to raising that bar.
Yeah. Well, supply chain takes up half of this building.
Yeah.
So obviously very critical. And that relationship between culinary and supply chain, as Tim alluded to, has been key critical in our success as a group over our history, but even more so now that we're finding the people are a lot smarter about what they're consuming.
Yeah. Well, and you and I eating over lunch and like, this is what we don't eat and this is why we don't. We want to know. I think more and more people want to know what's in our food.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And where it's grown. And okay, so jumping to that.
Sure.
How are you look in sustainability wise, for the amount of food that you all purchase, I'm assuming that you're not using all small farms because they can't produce that much, but are you looking to smaller farmers or local?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We look for women-owned businesses. We look for local fisheries in some cases. I just actually leveraged last week. We had 60-pound lake trout that were flown into for us within a few hours of needing it. So we're working, and that particular fishery has tribal ties for the park and the history of the park. So there's very deep roots there within the communities. And while we are a very large organization, we have the flexibility to leverage local, hyper-local, in some cases, partners, and get them, one, processed from making sure that they're a safe facility that we want to partner with, but two, making sure that the back end is covered from an insurance perspective, but also getting these really small vendors paid rapidly because we don't want them out of pocket on product. So we have those mechanisms in place. We do a great job of being partners to our local community. So we all live in our local communities. Yeah. So we have to face these people when we leave for this building. So we make sure that we're good stewards and partners of the communities. Yeah.
Well, and I like the fact that you said you want to pay them because small farmers or anybody, like any kind of purveyor that's an entrepreneur, doesn't have 90 days
no, absolutely not.
In savings to forego that for the work that we're doing, myself included.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. And then how do you call on that when you're showing it? Do you showcase those farmers?
We certainly do. Yeah. Well, typically in this space here, we obviously hyper local signage. I think if you go over to our coffee, we have a local granola vendor that we work with. She is based out of Harrisburg, about 120 miles away, but she's blown up within the East Coast, and great story, husband and wife that just basically left their day jobs and batched 1 million granola bars overnight. It's just a wonderful story. I'm exaggerating with 1 million, but good story. And then we obviously have very local, the Garden State is 7 miles away.
Right.
So we have really nice vendors. And then Kennett Square, mushroom capital of the world,
really
is right around the corner. That in our back pocket. And then we're blessed with having local seafood with the Jersey and Delaware beaches. So we're able to leverage very hyper local to Philly. And then that goes for all of our markets.
Okay.
Yeah. And we really rely on the local expertise of our on-site staff, whether it's the general managers or our executive chefs, to go out and make that community outreach. And then we have a local team here that will take care of the back end economics and the paperwork that will help us through getting them into our supply chain system. And then we also,
because there's the whole nother beast in general.
Yeah. All the unsexy stuff.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And then we also partner with local restaurants in general. Like we'll host a local restaurant that will come in and feature, and they'll actually run a station within our premises to help out some of our smaller restaurants in the area.
When I was at that food allergy safety summit, we were at the University of Maryland, which is on tribal ground, and we partner with the tribe, and they come in and do one of their stations once a month or once a week, which is to cook their indigenous food, which I'm like, oh my God,
it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
That's really cool. And and do you also design your menus? I know you've got this big bank of menus, but you're breaking down menus as well, but are you kind of focusing it on, hey, this is San Francisco versus South Georgia?
100%.
And so that you're eating the food that's indigenous to that area?
Yeah, I would say the cheesesteak that you get here would rival just about, and I'm going to probably get a lot of comments on this, but it would rival some of the best cheesesteaks in the cities because it's in our blood.
Right.
They do a really nice job. They get the cedar roll. They do it right here. So whereas if that recipe went to Georgia, I'm not confident they would execute it at the level that you would in Philadelphia. Right. So obviously there's very hyper local cuisines that we definitely do. Like the lake trout is a perfect example of that dish out at Lake Superior. Whiting is whitefish is a very common fish out there. We do smoked whitefish. So that's not something that would necessarily translate to all markets, although oddly enough, it does translate to the local market here. South Jersey has a affinity for whitefish.
Okay.
I'm not sure where that stems from, but
I don't know. But I had a really good gluten-free fish and chips last night. Yes, at the White Dog restaurant. I'm like, I can't eat it. I can't eat it anywhere else, so I'm going to order it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So safety, this is the whole podcast is based around the premises of safety, sustainability, and inclusion.
Sure.
So what do those three words mean to you as the VP of operations for all of these different kinds of venues? So when I'm going to a park versus a conference center versus a zoo.
Yeah. So every meeting of three or more folks in our organization starts with a safety moment. Doesn't matter what it is. We could be sitting in this conference room right now. The meeting starts with a safety moment. That is ingrained in our culture as an organization. It does not have to be food related. It could be facilities related. It could be I was driving to work, my windshield wipers weren't working correctly. It could be anything, but that is the culture here. And we want to first and foremost make sure people go home in the same condition that they arrive at work. So safety, that is paramount here. Nothing comes second to that. Inclusion, making sure that we're working in an environment that, we talk about diversity. As you walk through these hallways, this organization brings a lot of different perspectives, very, very open to different thoughts, different ways of doing work. And it makes it a really great place to come in and work. And we've done a really good job of bringing folks back after obviously the pandemic and embracing the inclusiveness of this environment. When it comes to food, inclusive is having options for just about everybody. And when I say just about everybody, if we can't accommodate someone, we'll figure out a way to do it. But making sure that people feel comfortable to have the dialogue, and that we're receptive to understanding folks that may eat differently than each other.
Right.
So it's making sure that we're having that dialogue. And that's when Tim talks about taking it back, is the human interface piece is probably the most difficult thing to train somebody on.
Right.
But the most rewarding from a guest satisfaction perspective is being able to have someone that's educated or has that dialogue. And we all tell all our folks, if you don't have the answer, go find it. And I said, but before we sat down, I said, if I don't feel comfortable answering a question here, I will punt, but I will find out and come back.
Yeah.
What was the third pillar?
Sustainability. Yeah.
First and foremost, from us, you've seen it. You've been smacked in the face as you walk in this building. LEED certification on the wall.
Yeah.
We are very hyper conscious about our environment. We want to make sure that the product that we're serving over the last few decades, we continue to march forward and be it first and foremost. It's important to our clients, but it's really important to our employees. We are interfacing with very local communities down to elementary schools. My kids interface with Aramark food on the regular. We want to make sure.
Oh, the Aramark's in their school?
The one, my daughter's school.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're feeding my daughter.
So you're like, okay, people.
Yeah. You better be on it.
Yeah.
Because she'll come home. She'll let us know. Yeah. No, but it's important. And then in the college, so we're in folks' lives from a very, very early start, from K through 12 through our higher ed, our sports venues, and then when they're going out to the national parks to enjoy the outdoors. Right there.
And when I don't know what popped this into my head, but I know I've seen some videos lately from the national parks, and this is just completely random, but they're designing the parks, or they're providing opportunities for people who utilize wheelchairs to participate in the park. So how does that impact the buildings that you're using and the way you're serving? And this is completely out of the blue, so if you don't have the answer to that.
Well, I don't know. I know that recent architecture and engineering has been very relied on, and even down to some of the boats that we use are inclusive of wheelchairs or are accessible in some kind of fashion, even down to the way that we're modeling our docks and making sure that they're accessible. I can't speak on MPS's part for the way that they're integrating that into their spaces. A lot of their infrastructure is old for good reason.
Yeah.
Like it was built to last. Mission 66 was a big initiative of theirs. And there was a big endeavor with the national park. So a lot of the facilities upgrades, we just recently did one at the park that's completely accessible from multiple different entrances. And you talk about inclusion. It's not wheelchair accessibility. It doesn't have to go to the back of the building to get into the building.
Right.
So
Yep.
I have seen that firsthand. I can't speak for their portion of that, but I know from our engineering, it's.
Well, and they're also like providing the chairs so they can hike. The individuals who utilize wheelchairs can now hike the mountain.
Yeah.
In these really cool wheelchairs that are like, it's fascinating. So I'm excited about that.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. Okay. We've talked about a lot of different things. So thank you.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. You travel a lot. How do you decompress in this crazy world of hospitality?
So I do a lot of camping.
Oh, you do? Glamping or camping?
You could probably call it glamping. During COVID, I bought a 1971 Airstream. So
nice.
But with that, we do a lot of my wife is a self-taught baker. She opened a bakery when we lived in Arizona.
Okay.
We do a ton of cooking. And while that may not be relaxing for folks, we love to cook down there. And we love to I told you I go talk to the fishmonger, whatever's been caught fresh. Like we are constantly trying to learn something about food. We enjoy food as a family, and that's how we kind of ground ourselves. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
very cool. Yeah. And do you take it all over?
We don't. It stays static at one. It's an Airstream only campground. It's down by the shore. It's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Margaret and whoever else was watching, I appreciate you being here. This is I'm doing it wrong again, the Eating at a Meeting podcast covering Aric's Face Up. And Aric is with Aramark. You can find him on LinkedIn and tune in with him and come find us at the IAC conferences because we're both there all the time.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. Thanks for the tour.
Yeah.
Everybody, until next time, which would be next Wednesday, I will be coming to you from Detroit. Stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.